Welcome to our deep dive, and today it's all about something you're clearly passionate about.
Oh, yeah.
Compost and sustainability.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're going to be exploring Chapter 9 specifically.
Okay.
Digging into how compost impacts waste reduction, soil conservation,
Right.
and climate change mitigation.
Yeah.
Plus, we'll take a look at how community composting initiatives are really making a real difference out there.
For sure.
So, those overflowing landfills
Yeah.
that we always hear about
Mm-hmm.
and the constant worry about climate change.
Right.
Well, it turns out compost
Interesting.
might just be a secret weapon in tackling these very issues.
Huh.
What do you think?
Well, it's fascinating to me how something as simple as composting, often just relegated to backyard gardening, is actually a powerhouse solution on a much larger scale.
Yeah, let's unpack that connection
Yes.
to sustainability.
Sure.
You specifically mentioned wanting to understand how compost impacts waste reduction. It seems almost too good to be true.
Right.
That something that we usually think of as waste can actually help us reduce waste overall.
It really is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not magic,
Okay.
but it's pretty close.
All right.
Think about this.
Okay.
Nearly a third of all household waste
Wow.
is compostable.
That's a lot.
Things that instead of rotting in a landfill can be transformed
But,
into something incredibly valuable.
so, okay, less stuff going to landfills.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the big deal about landfills anyway?
Oh, yeah, good question.
Isn't it just where our trash goes to disappear?
Not quite.
Okay.
Landfills are a major source of methane, which, as we all know, is a greenhouse gas far more potent than carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
And when organic material decomposes in a landfill,
Okay.
it releases methane into the atmosphere.
Right.
But when that same material is composted, the decomposition process happens in a way that avoids producing those significant amounts of methane.
So composting is helping reduce those harmful methane emissions,
Yes,
which is a big win for the climate.
definitely.
But I'm also curious about the impact on the soil itself.
Okay.
You mentioned soil conservation as another key area of interest.
Yes.
What makes compost so beneficial for soil health?
Well, you can think of soil
Okay.
as the foundation of a thriving ecosystem.
Right.
And compost,
Gotcha.
it's like adding steel reinforcements to that foundation,
Okay.
making it stronger
Gotcha.
and more resilient.
So compost improves the soil structure,
Exactly.
creating a better balance of air and water
Yes.
that allows roots to grow deeper and stronger.
Yeah,
Healthy plants need healthy soil.
absolutely.
And compost seems to be a key ingredient there.
It really is.
Is it also a natural fertilizer?
Oh, for sure.
I know you were interested in reducing reliance on chemical fertilizers.
Yes.
Which I hear can have some negative environmental impact.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Compost is like a slow-release fertilizer, packed with essential nutrients plants need to thrive.
Okay.
And because those nutrients are released gradually,
Right.
it's a much gentler and more sustainable approach compared to chemical fertilizers that can sometimes overload the soil and even pollute waterways.
So compost is like this natural, eco-friendly way to give our plants the nutrients they need while protecting the environment at the same time.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing.
It is, but what's even more fascinating is that compost doesn't just add nutrients.
Okay.
It also enhances the soil's ability to retain those nutrients
Oh, wow.
and water.
So it's not just about feeding the plants,
Right.
but also improving the soil's overall ability to nourish and sustain them.
Exactly.
That seems crucial, especially with growing concerns about water scarcity in many parts of the world.
Absolutely. Healthy soil, enriched by compost, acts like a sponge,
Wow.
absorbing and holding water more effectively.
Okay.
So this means less water is lost to runoff, which not only benefits your garden, but also helps conserve water on a larger scale.
That makes sense.
And speaking of the bigger picture,
Yeah.
you mentioned being interested in how composting helps mitigate climate change.
Yes. It seems like such a simple act,
It is.
yet it has these incredible ripple effects on the environment.
Yeah.
Can you explain how compost actually helps combat climate change?
Well, compost plays a dual role here.
Okay.
First, as we mentioned, it helps reduce methane emissions from landfills,
Right.
but it also acts as a carbon sink.
Okay.
As organic material decomposes in compost, it actually helps sequester carbon in the soil, pulling it out of the atmosphere.
So wait, the soil becomes like a carbon storage unit.
You got it.
Wow.
By increasing the soil's organic matter content, we're essentially locking away carbon
Okay.
that would otherwise contribute to global warming.
That's incredible.
It really is.
Like composting is this hidden climate solution right beneath our feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like this isn't just something individuals can do in their backyards.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You mentioned wanting to understand how community composting initiatives are scaling up these benefits.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Community composting initiatives are popping up everywhere,
Oh,
from neighborhoods to schools to entire cities.
that's great.
And they're really demonstrating the power of collective action
Okay.
in creating a more sustainable future.
I'm really intrigued by that idea of communities coming together around composting.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the different models
Okay.
for community composting, and how are they making a difference?
Well, there are so many inspiring examples out there.
Okay.
Some communities have set up centralized composting sites
Okay.
where residents can drop off their food scraps and yard waste.
Yeah.
Others have organized neighborhood composting programs where residents share bins and resources.
So it's about creating systems that make composting accessible and convenient for everyone,
Yeah.
even those who might not have the space or time
Right.
to manage their own compost pile.
Right. Exactly. And these community composting programs often go beyond just waste diversion. They become hubs for education,
Interesting.
fostering a deeper understanding of sustainability and empowering people to make a difference in their own communities.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It creates this ripple effect of positive change,
Yeah.
going beyond just the environmental benefits to fostering a sense of community and shared purpose.
I agree.
Speaking of inspiring examples, you mentioned the Baltimore Compost Collective.
Oh, yes. They're a phenomenal example of how a community-driven composting initiative can thrive.
Okay.
Starting as a small group of dedicated individuals,
Right.
they've grown to serve hundreds of households,
Wow.
collecting and composting tons of organic material that would have otherwise ended up in landfills.
That's an incredible testament to the power of grassroots action.
It is.
But I'm sure getting something like that started takes a lot of organization and resources.
It does, but luckily there are organizations like the Institute for Local Self-Reliance
Okay.
and the U.S. Composting Council.
That provide resources and support for community composting initiatives across the country.
Yeah, they offer guidance on everything from setting up a composting system
Okay.
to navigating local regulations to securing funding.
Wow. So they really are a great resource for anyone interested in starting or expanding
Yes,
a community composting initiative.
absolutely.
It sounds like they're really helping to pave the way for a more widespread adoption of composting. But let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about some of the practical aspects of composting.
All right.
You know, I know you're eager to start composting yourself,
Yeah.
but you're also a bit apprehensive about the whole process.
Oh, yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah,
Composting can seem a bit daunting at first,
right.
but it's truly simpler than most people think.
Okay.
And once you get the hang of it, it becomes second nature,
Right.
just like recycling or
Yeah.
taking out the trash.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Good.
What are some of the common concerns people have when they first start thinking about composting? And how can we address those?
Well, I think one of the biggest hurdles is often just the ick factor.
Uh-huh.
People imagine a smelly, messy pile
Right.
attracting flies and rodents.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
No, you really don't.
Yeah.
But that's really not the case when composting is done right.
So it's all about having the right knowledge and techniques
Yes.
to create a healthy and manageable compost system.
Exactly. And a lot of those concerns stem from misconceptions
Okay.
about what can and can't be composted.
Right.
For example, many people think you can't compost things like meat or dairy products.
Yeah, I've heard that those things can attract pests and create unpleasant odors.
That's true for traditional backyard composting.
Oh.
But there are other composting methods like bokashi composting
Right.
that can handle those types of materials.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
We talked about bokashi earlier.
Yeah.
It's that anaerobic composting method that uses fermentation.
Exactly. Bokashi composting opens up a whole new range of possibilities. Because you can compost virtually any food scraps,
Okay.
including meat, dairy bones, and even cooked food.
That's a game changer for those who want to reduce their waste even further.
It is.
What about space?
Oh, yeah, that's another one.
People think you need a big backyard to compost effectively,
Right.
which I don't have.
I hear you, but space constraints don't have to be a barrier to composting.
Okay.
Remember, worm composting
Yeah.
is a fantastic option for smaller spaces.
Right. Those hardworking worms can create compost right on your countertop.
Exactly. And there are also compact composting systems designed specifically for balconies or patios.
That's great news.
Yeah, so you don't have to have a sprawling garden to reap the benefits of composting.
Okay, so what about the time commitment? I know you mentioned being busy. Is composting going to add a lot to your already packed schedule?
Well, that's a valid concern, but honestly, the actual time you spend actively managing your compost is minimal.
So it's not like a full-time job?
No, not at all.
Okay, good.
It's more about establishing a simple routine.
Right.
Once you've set up your composting system,
Yeah.
it's really just a matter of adding your food, scraps, and yard waste regularly.
Okay.
And giving it a turn every now and then.
Okay. That sounds manageable.
Good.
And once you have that finished compost, it's like getting a gift from nature, right?
Yeah.
I mean, free fertilizer for your plants, which is good for your garden and good for the environment.
Exactly. And it's not just about the financial savings.
Right.
There's something incredibly satisfying about closing the loop on your organic waste,
Yeah.
knowing that you're turning what would have been discarded into something that nourishes life.
It's like turning trash into treasure.
I love that.
I love that imagery.
It is, and that connection to nature is something I think we've lost touch with in our modern consumer-driven society.
I agree. It's easy to forget where our food comes from and what happens to the things we throw away. Composting really brings those cycles of life and decomposition back into focus.
Absolutely, and it helps us see ourselves as part of a larger ecosystem, not separate from it.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired.
Good.
Let's talk more about the specific steps involved in starting a compost pile.
Okay,
I know you're eager to dive in and get your hands dirty.
let's do it.
All right, so whether you're starting a traditional backyard compost pile
Yeah,
or opting for a more compact system, the basic principles are the same.
right.
We've already talked about the importance of balancing browns and greens, but let's break that down further.
Okay.
What are some examples of good brown materials
Okay.
to add to a compost pile?
Well, browns are materials rich in carbon.
Okay.
Think dry leaves, shredded paper, cardboard wood chips, or even sawdust.
Okay.
These materials provide structure to your compost pile,
Gotcha.
helping with air circulation and drainage.
And what about green materials?
Greens are materials rich in nitrogen.
Okay.
Think food scraps like fruit and vegetable peel,
Right.
coffee grounds, tea bags, and grass clippings. These materials provide the nitrogen that fuels that decomposition process.
So it's all about creating a balanced diet for those hardworking microorganisms
Yes.
that are breaking down the materials.
Exactly.
And I remember you mentioned a ratio of about 2 or 3 parts browns
Right.
to 1 part greens.
That's a good rule of thumb to start with.
Okay.
But the ideal ratio can vary depending on the specific materials you're composting
Yeah.
and the conditions in your compost pile.
So it's about paying attention and adjusting as needed.
Exactly.
What are some other key factors to consider when setting up and managing a compost pile?
Moisture is crucial.
Okay.
The materials in your compost pile should be damp, like a wrung-out sponge.
Right. Not too wet, not too dry.
Exactly. If it's too wet, it can become anaerobic and start to smell.
Okay.
If it's too dry, the decomposition process will slow down.
So moisture management is key.
It is.
What about air circulation?
Yeah.
I know you mentioned that oxygen is essential for the composting process.
It is. Those hardworking microorganisms need oxygen to breathe.
Right.
That's why it's important to turn your compost pile regularly using a pitchfork or a compost aerator.
So turning the pile helps introduce air and keep things moving along?
Exactly. And turning also helps to mix the materials,
Yeah.
ensuring that everything decomposes evenly.
So I'm starting to get a sense of the composting rhythm.
Yeah.
Layering the materials, monitoring the moisture, turning the pile. It's like a little dance with nature.
I love that. And just like any dance, it takes practice and a willingness to adapt to your partner.
Speaking of adapting, what are some common challenges that people encounter when composting?
Sure.
And how can we troubleshoot those?
Well, pests can sometimes be an issue, especially if you're composting food scraps.
Right. Nobody wants a compost bin overrun with critters.
Exactly. But there are several things you can do to prevent pests.
Okay.
First, make sure you're burying your food scraps deep enough in the pile.
Okay.
Under a layer of brown materials, this helps mask the odors that attract pests.
So it's like creating a compost sandwich, browns on the bottom and top with greens in the middle.
I like that analogy. And avoid adding things like meat, dairy, or oily foods to your compost pile, as these can be particularly attractive to pests.
Makes sense. What if you're still having trouble with pests even after taking those precautions?
You might want to consider using a compost bin with a lid to keep pests out.
Okay, that makes sense. What about odors? I know you mentioned that a healthy compost pile shouldn't smell bad, but what if it does?
Odors are usually a sign that something is off balance in your compost piles.
So it's like a signal that we need to adjust something.
Exactly. The most common cause of odor is too much moisture.
Okay.
If your compost pile smells sour or like ammonia, it's probably too wet.
And how do we fix that?
Add more dry brown materials to absorb that excess moisture. You can also turn the pile more frequently to improve air circulation.
So it's all about those key factors we talked about: moisture, aeration, and the balance of materials.
Exactly. Composting is a dynamic process, so it's important to pay attention to those factors and make adjustments as needed.
Right.
And remember, don't be afraid to experiment and learn as you go.
That's such an important reminder. It's about embracing the process and not getting discouraged if things don't go perfectly at first.
Absolutely. Composting is a journey, not a destination. And the more you learn about it, the more fascinating and rewarding it becomes.
Okay, I'm feeling much more confident about taking the plunge into the world of composting.
Good.
But I'm also curious about how I can connect with others who are composting. I know you mentioned the community composting initiatives, and those sound really intriguing.
They are community composting initiatives offer a fantastic way to connect with like-minded people,
Yeah.
share knowledge and resources, and make a bigger impact on your local environment.
What are some ways to find community composting programs in my area?
You can start by checking online resources like the U.S. Composting Council website. They have a directory of composting facilities and programs across the country. You can also reach out to your local municipality or environmental organizations.
Right.
Many cities and towns have composting programs or resources for residents.
Okay, that's great advice. And for those who might not have access to a community composting program, what are some ways to connect with other compost enthusiasts?
Well, there are online forums and social media groups dedicated to composting.
Oh, cool.
These are great places to ask questions, share tips, and find inspiration from others who are on the same journey.
It's amazing how something as simple as composting can create these connections and community.
Yeah.
It really highlights the social and community building aspects of sustainability. It's not just about individual actions, it's about coming together to create a more sustainable future for everyone.
Absolutely. And that sense of shared purpose is incredibly empowering.
I agree.
When people realize they can make a tangible difference in their communities
Right.
through simple acts like composting, it sparks this ripple effect of
Yeah.
positive change that extends far beyond the compost bin.
I love that it's a reminder that we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And our actions, no matter how small they may seem, can have a collective impact.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive into the world of compost has been truly eye-opening.
Oh, good.
I'm walking away with a whole new appreciation for this humble
Right.
yet powerful practice.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's amazing how something as seemingly simple as composting can touch upon so many critical aspects of sustainability,
Absolutely.
from waste reduction and soil health to climate change mitigation
Yeah.
and community building.
It's clear that compost is more than just a gardening technique. It's a fundamental solution
Yes,
for creating a more sustainable and resilient future.
I wholeheartedly agree. And the beauty of composting is that it's something that anyone can do,
Right.
regardless of their background,
Right.
resources, or living situation.
Exactly. Whether you have a sprawling backyard or a tiny apartment balcony, there's a composting method that can work for you. And as we've seen,
Right.
there are incredible resources and communities out there to support you on your composting journey.
Absolutely. So what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
It's time to get composting
Right.
and be a part of this growing movement toward a healthier planet.
I'm ready to dig in. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of compost.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep composting.
Happy composting, everyone.